Well, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. We're right at noon, so thank you for coming out today on this very cold, chilly October day. Sunny. But it's sunny, that is true. It is very sunny. I'm thankful for that. But I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today. So we have Drs. Bryce Maxell, not Bruce Maxwell, I was just confused, and then Dr. Jessica Mitchell from the Montana Natural Heritage Program. And so Bryce is the program director for the Montana Natural Heritage Program overall, and then Jessica is the director of the Spatial Analysis Lab, which is a component of the Montana Natural Heritage Program. They're just giving a brief introduction and to allow them enough time. And then, yeah, so if you would join me in a round of applause and welcoming them.
Thanks. I think our goals today are just to kind of give you an overview of the Heritage Program, what we're about in general, some specific projects that we're involved in. I'll start by giving an overview of the program, and then we'll switch back to Jessica for an overview of the Spatial Analysis Lab. Then we'll switch back to me and go through some of our website products. I guess I need to use the mouse. There we go. So to start with, heritage programs are based in all 50 states, all Canadian provinces, Latin American countries as well. We're housed in different organizations within each of those areas. We actually, Montana State Library in statute, and then the state library has contracted out operation of the program to the University of Montana. The Nature Conservancy was very heavily involved with the establishment of all the programs across the Western Hemisphere. But it's fairly common for them to be in fish and game agencies, DNRCs, DEQs. So you can imagine with that background, we do things a little bit differently. We have a little bit different focus within programs. But one thing that is common across all programs is that we manage taxonomy consistently, and we manage conservation status rank. So that's primarily what they're there for, is to understand the status of plant and animal communities, as well as individual species. And one of our bread and butter products that we have in Montana is this environmental summary report. It is the main product that's used in any NEPA process, any MEPA process, any permitting process. So whether it's cell towers, parking lots, forest plan revisions, this is one of the main products that goes into the beginning of those decision processes. In terms of giving you an overview of what we do, we have around 2 million animal observations in our databases. We're around 1 million plant observations, around 250,000 structured surveys. So it's anywhere either a plant or animal survey that is designed to detect individual species has been performed on the right there. And then we do that for around 3,900 animal species right now, around 4,900 plant species, and around 120 communities. And then for each of those, we try to assign a global rank and a state rank. We work with NatureServe as our parent body for assigning those global ranks. For the state ranks, we take the lead on that, with S1 or G1 being critically imperiled at the global or state scale, and G5 to S5 being secure at the global or state scale. One of the ways we get information in to our database is through our Survey 123 applications. We've got those out, and a lot of agency personnel are using those, essentially a smartphone app, and we're encouraging that. If those users are on an approved list, i.e. they're a trustable, credible botanist or wildlife biologist, if they upload those records before 5 o'clock at night, it'll show up on our databases and our websites the very next day. So the vision for our program right now is we run that. You might, if you're a wildlife biologist or any kind of resource manager, you might run an environmental summary report, then go out in the field, add observations via your smartphone that might add additional information to that project, get them uploaded. You could have an updated environmental summary report the very next day. We have a variety of individual surveys that we've added there, and we're continuing to add more, but our main one there is the Heritage Obs Collector. We also, for the public, encourage use of iNaturalist, and one thing I wanted to point out, I've really been harping on this to everybody that I can, is this smartphone application Seek. I would really highly, if you don't know about it, give it a try. It is amazing. Simply, it's associated with iNaturalist, but basically if you approach any plant or animal species, you don't even have to take a picture, but if you are just kind of scanning it, it quite often will come up with a species identification. And that is including like doing a flower with a bumblebee on it, it will go after the bumblebee, quite often get the identifications right. So it's a blast, actually. So we take that data, that underlying observation data that we have for individual plant and animal species, and we make, one of our products is our species of concern occurrence layer. This is only for S1, S2, S3 species that are on our state species of concern list. And we typically are mapping out the habitat around that observation, or we're buffering that observation by average home range size of a species. And that's why those are polygons. You can see some major large polygons there in the west for large carnivores. A lot of those yellow ones are birds. To fill in the gaps, because we don't have surveys everywhere, we do have a major modeling effort going on right now. Primarily right now we're using Maxent and have used Maxent for several years, but we are moving into random forests as well. And so this is a grassland bird species with optimal habitat in red there, and unsuitable habitat in blue. We are just a year and a half ago, we started moving into managing information on invasive species. And so we've made these risk maps on the invasive species front. So there we've got Dalmatian toadflax with low suitability habitat in yellow, moderately suitable habitat in orange, and optimal in red, or essentially the risk and the associated area of the state that risk is associated with. We're also doing that for some of the biocontrol species. So this is a biocontrol weevil on Dalmatian toadflax. And then we're starting to do things like overlay those two, and the green areas are where the host plant as well as the control weevil are both predicted to have either moderate or optimal suitable habitat. The blue is for the biocontrol, a moderate or optimal, and the yellow is just for the host plant. So kind of trying to get at maybe a bang for your buck in terms of biocontrol efforts. And then because we've gotten into this invasive species data pretty heavily in the last couple of years, we're starting to think about products for our future. And this is an early draft of essentially an overall risk for all of the noxious weed species that we're able to model, pointing out that our western Montana valleys and also our riparian areas major riparian areas in eastern Montana are at highest risk for the greatest number of species. But what we're undertaking right now is an effort to model all of our vertebrate species in the next year and all of our vascular plant species in the next year. And then we want to produce essentially biodiversity maps that you could use for either mammal diversity, bird diversity, any kind of taxonomic group that you want to focus on. We want to get those on the ground so that resource managers can use them for landscape planning efforts. Within our botany program, we are doing quite well in terms of having taxonomic representation for our vascular plants. And we've really ramped up getting our observation data. We've just, in the last couple of years, have a full checklist for lichens and mosses, and working with Tim Wheeler on the lichens and Joe Elliott on the mosses. And right now we're almost done with getting all of the diatom species into our database. That's just a species listing, not all of the records, but we will work on that. But we still are kind of in an unknown land for macrofungi, algae, cyanobacteria, and hornworts. On the observation front, we've really ramped that up. You can see getting in botanical observations in the last few years. And one thing our botanist, Andrea Pipp on the right there, is working on right now is helping lead this effort to create a statewide rare plant conservation strategy. And for any of you who are interested, I'd encourage you to get involved with that. Essentially, we think this could be a good driver for what gets done on plants in the state, and creating justification for funding to do everything from basic surveys to modeling to assigning conservation status ranks to on-the-ground management plans for individual species. On the animal front, our database is dominated by invertebrates with about 3,004, but that's obviously pretty poor when you consider there's probably tens of thousands of invertebrate species in the state that we don't have in our database yet. But we have good coverage on the vertebrate species, and we're just continuing to chip away on the invertebrates as we have resources to do so. In terms of conservation status ranks, you can kind of see there for those individual groups. The red shows what percentage of that group is species of concern. I guess, again, I draw your attention to the invertebrates there on the right, indicating that we still are far behind on where we want to be in terms of assessing the conservation status of invertebrates. So we are trying to work with invertebrate experts wherever we possibly can. Another thing our zoology group is working on right now is focused on bat surveys in prep for arrival of white nose syndrome. And so there's been a heck of a lot of work done on cave surveys across the state. But basically the take-home message there is our bats don't seem to be using caves. They seem to be using cracks and crevices, talus slopes, rock outcrops. If we lost all of our bats from our cave counts across the state, that would be probably 3,500 animals. We know there's millions of bats across the state. So that bodes well for our bat species, we think. We don't think the transmission environments in those rock outcrops are going to be as good as cave environments. Also, on the bat front, a lot of work going into active season roost surveys. And so these are all bridge, for the most part, bridge surveys across the state, but also some rock outcrop surveys. And then a major effort with acoustic surveys. All those yellow dots and red dots there are acoustic stations that we're in for multiple years. 78 of them, 13 million bat calls recorded. We used the supercomputer in Butte to analyze it because that was the only way we could chew through it, which was kind of an exciting endeavor. I think we have around 120 terabytes of bat calls. It's been a little mind-boggling to deal with. And then our ecology group, they focus on land cover, which Jessica will talk to you about, and also wetland and riparian mapping for the state. The green area there on that right map shows you the quads, USGS quads that have the NWI mapping completed. That's about 87% of the state. And we have funding in place now to get to about 90% of the state, those dark blue quads. The light blue quads, we're still looking for funding to get those completed. Obviously, this is a major effort and focus for us because of the biodiversity that those habitats are associated with those habitats. One tool that I wanted to mention to you that we're about to release is our beaver restoration assessment tool that our ecology group is working with folks at Utah State over, and essentially putting in inputs on stream, hydrology, watershed characteristics, DEMs, flow models, and also throwing over the top of that information on human networks. And then the idea is to produce maps where essentially you can say, well, there aren't beaver here now, but this is the best place to put them, or allow them to colonize, whereas other areas are going to present management problems. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and let her go through and give you an overview of the Spatial Analysis Lab. And then we'll come back and show you some of our websites.
Organizationally, the Spatial Analysis Lab is housed under the Montana Natural Heritage Program. It's part of the Natural Resource Information System, which is administered by the State Library, but operated under contract with the University of Montana. So we're a bit of a hybrid lab that has been on campus in the Natural Sciences building since I think the early 90s. A primary mission is developing landscape scale ecological information, and that's through partnerships with public agencies, research groups, and conservation organizations. So the aim there is really to address resource management needs. Some areas of emphasis include one, remote sensing research and applications, two, bridging that gap between some technical and applied research and management needs, and then three, we're interested in providing training opportunities, work opportunities for students, and also developing educational resources currently with many primarily undergraduate institutes. As Bryce mentioned, part of our core work that's supported through the state is stewardship of the state land cover map. And then we're also involved to some degree with providing technical support for the wetlands and riparian layer as well. You'll notice there are several Montana spatial data infrastructure themes, and this follows a national model. Right now, the land cover theme is under comprehensive revision. So if we look at the base map imagery for our current land cover, it goes back to 1999-2000. The classification system is a Montana version of the ecological systems. So this system supports habitat ranking. It ties into the environmental summary reports Bryce showed you, as well as field guide information, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in Bryce's demo. Our first sweep has been to take a look at a new round of national land cover classifications that are being put out through the USGS remap project. So this is based on 2016 mapping. It has, for existing vegetation cover, the same ecological systems classification. So we're doing some comparisons. You'll notice we're incomplete right now on the national level with filling in the last part of the state. There's also efforts to begin to think about what other products could be developed for land cover. Are there particular areas of the state with higher resolution information where we can improve, for example, rangeland mapping? And then also, can we think about temporal components to land cover that may be useful? This is just an example of a product we're working on right now, which is agricultural conversion over the past decade. As a lab, we have a background also with processing discrete return LiDAR for developing vegetation project or products such as canopy roughness, vertical complexity. And we're involved with the Montana State LiDAR Plan, which is a plan that's being put together to cost share acquisitions of LiDAR across the state, build statewide LiDAR data set with the USGS 3DEP program. So there are some resources online here for taking a look at what has been acquired at what quality levels. Some areas have been acquired with a point density of 8 points per meter squared, which gives us a good deal of information about what's going on with vegetation structure, whereas other places have been flown at a quality level of 2 and really are aimed at floodplain management applications. We also have an inventory now of areas that have been prioritized for future acquisitions. So if you're thinking about mapping projects and what additional information you may be able to take in, this is a good place to start with planning-wise. We do work closely with the Wetland and Riparian Mapping Center. We support space on campus for several photo interpreters. We provide training and are also going through the process of developing new automated workflows to improve discrimination between wetlands and uplands. Another objective that sort of tracks through this whole process is trying to bring in information on wetland function and ultimately integrating the wetland mapping in the state of Montana with the land cover data set. So half of our program is supported through core dollars. The other half roughly is supported through research projects and applied projects. And one common theme for those projects is that we tend to combine ground observations or plot surveys on the ground with airborne optical and structural information, and then even scale up to satellite sensing data. So there's a scaling theme typically here. Some expertise we have is in vegetation spectroscopy. For example, estimating foliar nitrogen content in sagebrush, what is its dietary quality, and then combining that with, for example, biomass to look at quantity and quality. We're also able to tease out other chemical constituents such as monoterpenes, phenols, cellulose, lignin. And we do this again across spatial scale. So this is some noisy data from a UAV. This is really detailed information from leaf spectra on the ground. And then this is what you would get from a coarse satellite signature. Some examples in the Reynolds Creek Experimental Watershed, which is over in the Hawaii's west of Boise. This is wall-to-wall mapping of sagebrush biomass on the right, and then a comparable amount of sagebrush foliar nitrogen. Right now, we are also working on several invasive species mapping projects with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, one being looking at the prospect or the accuracy of detecting ventonata, which is a new grass that's invading westward. And so the idea is figuring out how well we can detect this species on the bison range and then trying to scale up to glean a more regional picture of just the invasion process. Some other examples would be cheatgrass in the centennials and both cheatgrass, medusa head, and some other winter annuals on the CMR. We also evaluate new satellite products such as ecostress, which is providing thermal and evapotranspiration information from a new satellite on the International Space Station. So this was an evaluation that was done really for a proposal. It's fairly cursory, but with the Climate Office to take a look at whether or not this sort of information could help improve drought monitoring for the state. And finally, another project we are trying to gear up on right now is the mapping of biodiversity. And this is tying in some ecological observation networks in the northeastern US and trying to relate diversity metrics on the ground directly to optical and structural airborne measurements. The idea here is to hopefully scale up from potentially hotspots that may be occurring to what's going on with environmental gradients. And this is an idea that is kind of connecting geodiversity with biodiversity and referred to often with the term conserving nature's stage. And the application idea here is also conservation planning. This is leaning in the direction of thinking about networks to network proposal submissions, collaboration. So how do we think about information databases across heritage program networks at a regional scale, and then even looking at, for example, biodiversity observation databases globally, or the GeoBon Americas that's connected with NatureServe, and then Xenobon, a China, I guess, sister or another division of GeoBon. I'll close on that.
And then I'll go back and I'm going to show you, that kind of gives you at least a taste for some of our products, but I'm going to go back and show you now how we deliver those on our websites. But before let me think about this. Before I get into that, I wanted to say that part of the reason we hired Jessica was we are housed, most of our staff is housed in the State Library in Helena, but we are University of Montana employees. We have the Spatial Analysis Lab. we wanted more on-campus interaction in the UM, on the UM campus, and trying to, you know, essentially take products that are being developed by cutting-edge folks, but get them right at people's fingertips. That's one thing that I see all the time is resource managers, they would love to use the latest and greatest, but they don't have any time to do it. And so that's what we try to do with all our products, is kind of can them and get them on people's radar screens. And so part of the reason for saying that is we're also, you know, reaching out. We've done some collaborative stuff with Mike Ivey to help get Bombas accounts up and things like that. But we would love to collaborate wherever possible. So I think one thing that we offer, I'm thinking of, for those of you who might know Peter Rice, who retired a few years ago and was responsible for the invaders database for many decades. And this also happened with Dick Hutto, who was in charge of the Avian Science Center at the University of Montana. What do you do at sort of the end of your career when you've built this massive warehouse of information? How do you keep it alive and relevant to resource managers? And so we've incorporated that information, and it is, you know, those basic observations that they gathered over their time at the university are getting used by resource managers. So we would encourage grad students to contribute their data and professors to contribute their data. And we also work a lot with all of those bridge surveys I showed you for bats have been a combination of MSU undergraduate students, U of M graduate students, Salish Kootenai undergrad students, and Montana Western undergrad students that did all those surveys. So, so I'm going to take you through 3 of our websites, our field guide, our species snapshot, and our natural heritage map viewer. I'll start with a field guide. This site gets about 60 hours of use. Our Google Analytics stats tell us 60 hours of use on the average workday. So it's getting pretty heavily hit. And I'll just show you a few species here that can highlight what we're trying to do. The individual accounts have photos, their conservation status ranks, links out, a way to submit observations, sound files. We have those for all the birds, all the amphibians, a few of the mammals. General description information, range maps within the state. We have range polygons defined for all of our vertebrates. We are working on that massive effort right now for vascular plants. Hemispheric range maps. This is how we share observation data with the general public. These are a latitude and longitude block system started by Palmer David Scarr, who was a MSU professor who was really key into birding back in the 60s. And that system still stays with us today. But this way of showing information on the internet doesn't create any problems for agency concerns over people collecting things like, you know, going out and collecting orchids or hunting individual species. We summarize by season, the records by season, by month. If you click on any individual thing, any individual graph there, you'll get more information. So migration, habitat. We also cross-link over to the individual habitats that the species are associated with, and that takes you to our ecological systems guide, where we've got general descriptive information, where those ecological systems occur in the state, the general environment, the vegetation species that are associated, cross-link with the NVC, any summary of dynamic processes like flooding, fire, or grazing that are important to that system. Management, we'd love to better develop our management sections. And then a crosswalk to individual species that occur in that system as well. So I'm gonna cross-link back over to Common Loon here. And let me go down. We also have, we're working pretty extensively on our reference system right now. So both the literature cited in that account as well as additional references. One thing that we are systematically working right now on is getting all of the theses and dissertations from the universities across the state into our system, those that we don't have already. our field guide has been pretty popular, and so we've actually had other programs in the Heritage Network and our Nature Serve network ask, could you help us develop field guides of our own? And so we have now launched guides for Wyoming, and they are just about to make this public. They're actually just making it public today, I believe is their first kickoff day, but we've been working with them on it for several years. So using our underlying base code, so it looks similar, but the idea here is that we can get this kind of information up for all surrounding states and provinces. And we have now done that for Utah as well. Utah hasn't released theirs yet, but they will probably later this winter. And we've got a contract in place to do this for California as well as Washington as well. So, and then we probably will try to target, again, the provinces and states around us to try to help our partners the most we can. Let me go back to our homepage, and I'm going to take you to our species snapshot site. So our species snapshot site is a way of quickly getting essentially a list of species for an individual area. And so we can do spatial filters, like we can say county or a town or a township. All of these spatial filters apply, but let's say we just wanted to get maybe a bird checklist for Gallatin County. So you could say, I want all the birds for Gallatin County that are in the database. And then you could explore how many observation records we have for those individual species, whether we have any of those species of concern occurrence polygons. Maybe if we've got a predicted habitat suitability model in place. Let me show you that really quick, just an example of one of those. We have an issue with this site where it is loading all of the list. We want to get the site up instead of having loading all the lists. So you could query out individual species here, either scientific or common name, and then just download the model write-up. And then each of these model write-ups that we have these in place for around 400 vertebrate species, and we're approaching around 100 plant species. Each of them has around a 15, 16-page write-up where we we give people the whole spiel. What methods we're using, how many records we had, how many were suitable for modeling efforts, how many background points we're using, what the environmental input layers are, which environmental input layers appeared to be the drivers for the species. We provide all of the cutoffs for the low, moderate, and optimal habitat suitability, and then throw out some maps with the continuous output as well as the categorized output. Again, so that for any model that we have, we've got that out there. And that process has been highly developed over the last few years, where we are essentially, it's all automated with Python. And essentially we just once we've reviewed the records, we put the species in the modeling queue, and the model pops out, the write-up pops out, and we're essentially evaluating it, and it takes about a half hour of our time, if you know a species well, to update the model output. On this species snapshot, there's also links over to our field guide, but what I wanted to point out is for any of those spatial areas or any of those filters, you could then just download a custom field guide PDF for that. So we've worked with state parks and others to make sure that they're starting to link to this. And then what they'll get is not the full field guide account that I showed you, but it'll show you your query criteria, and then it'll give you a one-pager and just show you the general description, diagnostic characteristics, and habitat, and then it'll show the range map, the observation data, and the time of year that the record was reported. And so we've just generated a 319-page report on the birds of Gallatin County. And the last website I want to show you is our map viewer. So our map viewer has around 800 public users have accounts, and around 1,200 natural resource managers have accounts for this. and it's getting a lot of use by those natural resource managers. There are a variety of tasks here that are topic-based, but I want to show you the environmental summary report, and I think that'll kind of give you an overview of some of these other tasks. Again, the environmental summary report is that bread and butter product that resource managers are using across the state right now. Our standard filter is to filter out species of concern, special status species, important animal habitat like caves or bird rookeries, and potential species of concern. So essentially someone, if they're generating an environmental summary report, they open up this task, they can then choose geographic filters. So let's again say that we wanted to do a summary for Gallatin County. We come down and just pick county as the filter, click on Gallatin County, and then we could run, download an environmental summary report for Gallatin County. While that's running, that'll take maybe 30, 40 seconds to run. They can also explore the results online. So if they open up native species, then they can get into species of concern occurrences. So again, these are those polygonal features. There we go, it's already generated. Oh, still doing it. I'm gonna open that up really quick just to give you a feel for it. So they'll get a PDF report that in this case, let's see how long this is. Oh, I'm not sure it'll, oh, there we go. So a 57-page report where we've stitched together our species lists that occur there, potentially occur there, and then summaries of, get through all of the species here. You saw that category there, other potential species go by. I'll talk about that in a second here. Also, it summarizes the surveys, the survey data. So how many nocturnal calling amphibian surveys have been done in the area? And in this case, we've got 79 or 286 amphibian nocturnal calling and surveys for amphibians. 79 observations resulted from that, and the most recent survey was in 2013. Also paired in that download are individual field guides. So I kind of scrolled through a whole bunch of lists of species. Each of those lists has those field guides that I showed you before, kind of one-pagers on the species. So again, if you're a resource manager, the idea is you download your environmental summary report, you go to the field, you could have all this on your tablet, or you could print out hard copies. And let's face it, you're not gonna, if you studied elk, you're not gonna probably know your bees very well. So they can have that information more at their fingertips. So let me just kind of go through the online and give you a feel for this report online. These again are those species of concern occurrences, and you'll see the individual species listing, how many species of concern occurrences we have, whether Section 7 consultation is recommended. We've worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that we're in line with what they want on that. And then the predictive model output. I won't really get into some of those others, but I wanted to note that if we hover over that predictive model output, you'll see it pop up, in this case, 1% of Gallatin County optimal, 46% moderate for that species. Let's look at Clark's nutcracker. You can then open up individual species within this. You could go to the field guide account. You could go to the single species overview, which I'm going to do just to give you a flavor for other data that we have. And you can just kind of work your way down the list on those individual species. Now there's still a tab open. My original environmental summary report is on one tab, and now I've got this single species overview up for Clark's nutcracker. And what you're seeing here are point counts, bird point counts that could have detected the species in gray. You're seeing a bunch of records in the other colors, and then you're seeing other dot colors. And then you're seeing moderately suitable, predicted moderately suitable habitat in orange, low suitability in yellow, unsuitable is just showing us clear and showing the DEM background there. So they could go through species by species and kind of get a feel, is my project area in an area that is a good landscape for the species or a poor landscape for the species? So that's for documented species. There are also, I'm going to skip over this just in the interest of time, but I want to point out that we are doing this for other potential species. Now that we have models in place, this has been a big step forward for us because we have a lot of environmental reviews going on where it's like a cell tower, a gravel pit. There's no surveys there. So they're just kind of, you know, it's just like this kind of conveyor belt process. But we want to make sure that those processes are considering species that potentially could occur there, even if there are no records there. So that's what this potential is all about. And then I wanted to show you, again, I kind of got into this on the hard copy, but we've got structured surveys. So everything from amphibians to birds to the invasive surveys there. We summarize the land cover for that area. So for Gallatin County, 37% is forest and woodland systems. And then here are the individual woodland system types, ecological system types. And it shows you the percentage of the county as well as the acreage associated with those individual systems. And then the same thing for wetland and riparian systems. Just an individual acreage breakdown for each of those wetland mapping types. This is an area of development for us, but biological reports. And this is why I was saying we're in the process of working on making sure we get all the theses and dissertations in so that all of the great research that's been done in the university systems is represented in these reports. And then an invasive and pest species summary. Again, this is new for us in the last couple of years. And the week coordinators are pretty happy about it because we were essentially asking them in the past to go out and avoid species of concern. And they, in theory, know what they're looking at. But how many of you have been out on the landscape and you see a native cercium sprayed? It happens a lot. So we want to make sure that these look-alike species, natives and invasives, are on their radar screen. Jessica, do you have anything you want to add in terms of land cover tasks or?
Well, if you put on land cover just the different summary statistics you could do and making the connection that with any individual occurrence information, you're pulling through the habitat information via land cover. And if you're interested in the classification themselves, maybe going over to field guide. But there's some queries you could do by, you know, if it's, you know, a high ranking ecological system and you wanted to look across a watershed to see what is its occurrence. Is it, you know, pretty rare here? Is it occurring more generally in another part of the state? And then we also have the ecoregions that you can summarize by. So that helps us maybe get a feel for where there are transitional areas and where the land cover or ecological system classifications that we're doing may have some discrepancies. So those are some things to point out.
I also wanted to point out that, let's just take invasives as an example. Any one of those folders, if you wanted to just rerun if you wanted to get those statistics for Jefferson County, it's just a matter of clicking over to Jefferson County and opening up the folder and it's run. It was about 5 years ago, we kind of had this epiphany that, hey, we could do all of this if we pre-intersect all of our data with all these administrative boundaries. We can get our websites to show those summaries in real time. And we do that on this county summary, for example, or I could switch over and do it on any one in this list. But you can also do it, you could just freehand draw for an area. And what it'll do then, again, is your orange was what I just drew. The red is an underlying hexagon. That underlying hexagon is the same hexagon we use for our modeling output. We kind of got into that because we were having issues with people going out and saying, well, your model's wrong on my pixel, my 90-meter pixel. And we're like, well, it's not how you're supposed to use it. So we basically just said, to get away from people misusing our modeling, we're going to go ahead and aggregate that model output into these 1 square mile hexagons. And then we realized, hey, that's a great unit. That was a unit that was used for the Westwide Crucial Habitat Assessment tool that a lot of fish and game agencies are using. And it also was a great summary unit for us to use. So we pre-summarized all of those data layers down here, everything on each hexagon. So as people add data to the database during the day, we have a large number of automated processes that recrawl and intersect all of these hexagons, all of the counties, all those administrative boundaries to get updated summaries for the next day. But the hexagon summary is how we're allowing people to, kind of generate for self-interested areas. They could also digitize if they don't want to freehand, if you want to stick on, say, a section boundary or some other rectangular boundary that you don't want to freehand. Another couple things to point out, and boy, before I forget, I want to make sure I say this, that university professors have access to this, grad students have access to this. You could get agency level access that I've been showing you. So, we'd love to have you make use of it if it'll help you out on your projects. And we'd love to get your information into our system. Couple of other things I wanted to show you really quickly are things like, let me close this bottom down real quick. We put in here a slider between different environmental layers. So you could look at air photos from the 1990s and compare those with 2017 air photos. I actually quite often use Bozeman as an example whenever I show this, because it's kind of staggering, the difference here in this area sometimes when you're sliding between the 1990s and the, I used color IR, just like air photos 2017. There's color IR there. Again, if anything you're trying to assess at the landscape scale there and want to compare two different time periods, it's a great way to do it. Maybe you're interested in just, gosh, I heard this guy talk about, Elk Creek, and I don't know where that is. Our geographic name information system is linked to this, so you can search for individual features. You can search for individual watersheds just by starting to type in Red Rock, and it'll take you to that watershed. So it's a great way to explore Montana. And I think it might help, gosh, I'm thinking of, like, in my grad school days, if I was doing a project in Montana, it really helped to just kind of figure out my study sites. So I think with that, let's take questions if there are any.
There are microphones along each of the benches, so carry microphones.
We had one here.
Great, thanks for presenting all that, and also all the work that went into making it. So I know a website like that doesn't just pop up. So thank you. So in regards to that data, does it provide the spatial data or the reports? When you said that we had that the faculty and students have access to it, does it provide the spatial data
Like
at that Hexagon level?
GIS desktop environment? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It does not provide that. We're essentially, what we're doing is we're rendering the features, map service, so that you can see the dots on the map, and then we're separately showing the tabular data underneath. But you could go and click on any observation and get the tabular data that's associated. Separately though, if you want a geodatabase of any of our data, whether it's wetland riparian mapping data or individual species data, all you need to do is submit a request on our homepage, and we can get you a geodatabase. And we have a lot of people that are on like 6-month recurring, so that we're pushing the latest information to them that they can use in a geodatabase, their local desktop.
Great.
In the back.
So I love this idea of nature's stage. How well integrated is gridded Sergo?
Oh, not well right now. We would love to, right now all we do for like our environmental summary report is we'll link over to the soil mapping site, which is not the greatest. The reason I was laughing is I work with, we have an NRCS person in the state library with us, and years ago I wanted to use fine grained soils data for modeling, and I think the promise is just not, we haven't achieved the promise of that in terms of creating a consistent statewide soils layer that is of a fine scale that we could use for modeling. It is on our to-do list to do more summaries on soils layers, though. Yeah, I'm not sure. Did I answer your?
I would say too, with the updated land cover, we're working closely with the NRCS, and there is a compiled Sergo database that probably contains more synthesized information than you'd find just about anywhere else. And the idea is to try to attribute the land cover with that. At some point, I think there'll be a little bit of integration. How that gets posted into NACU or adjusted is probably a different ballgame.
Yeah, soils data is so complex in terms of whether you want texture or what depth and all that kind of stuff. It's a hard beast to wrap your head around. Yeah.
Parallel would be geology.
Yep. Everyone we've showed this application to has said, could you summarize this, my layer? And we're like, yeah, well, eventually we would love to. We would love to do that. Here, I think we're here.
Yeah, why did you use Hexagon?
So the hexagons, just because they pack nicely at hierarchical scales, and because it was used by the wildlife agencies across the western U.S. And it's now being used by NatureServe, that same hexagon layer, which dates all the way back to the EMAP era. So there's just it's been used a bunch. So yeah.
I can speak to that because I worked for the Western Fish and Wildlife Association when developing that. So part of it is to avoid property boundaries. That's a big part of it. And then the other thing is that people species really don't move north, south, east, west. So if you're starting to look at any sort of habitat mapping, it works much better to have the hexagons. And they also stack quite a bit.
Yeah, we do have cadastral data. So I just turned the cadastral layer on there. And again, I didn't show you this, but if you come down and just click on any layer, then you can kind of pull out the tabular data. So if I open up cadastral there, I've got the landowner. So that's another great tool, if you're planning a research project, that you can zoom in, look at the habitat information, get the landowner name in terms of contacting them. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Have you guys integrated the original public land survey, like bearing tree information into your system yet?
No, we certainly have. There's the TRS boundaries, but not the actual. That is a layer I believe you can download off of the statewide GIS data list, though. But it's not in here.
Has that been vectorized, or is it just scans of the original map?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all this with us. That's great. So I'm part of the Spatial Sciences Center here at MSU, and also the Montana View Remote Sensing Consortium. And so, I love the idea of trying to collaborate more between the two universities. It seems like there's some great ideas from MSU that could somehow be better reflected in these types of products. And also, I'd just love to hear from you guys. And we could also speak offline about how we can sort of help strategize more collaboration on these types of products.
Absolutely.
What can MSU, because there's a lot of stuff and perspectives maybe here at MSU that we could help with.
Yeah. It kind of goes right to the heart of, I was thinking of this in grad school, and this drives me today, is like, I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And so you do your research, and then you got to do your next research, but how do you get that research used and at people's fingertips? And I just want to kind of, again, say that this is a great vehicle for that.
Mm-hmm. I reached out to Rick Waters.
Yeah.
Too. I think he was involved with Botany. That was sort of the last conversation we had maybe fall of last year, so
Yeah.
it would be great to have.
Okay.
You know, I just make a comment
Sure.
that may relate to that. I can remember working with the Heritage Program, maybe in the 80s. And it's just beyond belief what you've done with that. And with respect to your question, it used to be kind of statewide and MSU and library and Missoula, and then it's become focused where you are. But that's just such an interesting history to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we say this all the time when we're mostly dealing with staff stress, is there's lifetimes of data to be summarized on these individual species, and, you know, work as hard as you can, but go home and live your life. Yeah. So we've got a huge number of people to thank for everything you're seeing there. Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, guys.
Well, thank you.
Please reach out to us if you're interested in collaborating. Yeah.